Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, but we have our panelists already lined up for today, and we're going to be discussing some very important topics, mainly relating to taxes and inflation. So first of all, on our panel, people are familiar with him. He's actually the former Associate Dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law. Let's bring in Dan Worthington. Professor Dan Worthington, welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about two of our favorite topics today, taxes and inflation, which is things that you can't avoid, apparently. Also, we have another guest coming in from North Dakota, close to where you were at. He is a CPA. Let's bring in John Power from the Tax Coach. John, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
So good to have you here. And then the final person is actually a professional economist. He's also a candidate for the United States Senate in the great state of Kentucky. Let's bring in our economist, Paul Hamilton. Paul, welcome to the show.
Yay.
Okay. Well, the thing is, we've got some important topics. Mainly, it deals with taxes and inflation. So let's start off, I guess, with Dr. Worthington. What is the Biden policy when it comes to this crazy taxes and inflation? What are your thoughts on that? We'll bring Professor Worthington in.
Well, the Biden administration has done a number of different things that has fueled the fire of inflation. I think the force on the economy of increased oil prices and gas prices due to the fact that America is no longer energy independent has really caused a lot of price pressure because of freight and travel. I mean, it's just exacerbated the whole situation. Initially, it was the large infusion of cash into the system, all the free money the government was giving away that put a strain on supply and demand, and put inflationary pressures. But that's all dried up, and now there are all these spending bills that are just absolutely ridiculous and unsustainable. That will cause even further inflationary pressure. It's sort of like they're doing it on purpose. It's so strange. It's like the Democrats are putting a gun to their head and saying, we want to kill our country because we don't like it. We think it should be more like Europe. It's absolutely insane to watch what's happening with the Democrats and the policies that they're making. Well, having said that, the Republicans didn't do all that much better when they were in charge because they were spending like they're on a field day as well. But the one thing that was happening is that America was energy dependent, and we were paying about $2 less per gallon at the pump, and diesel was cheap, and so truckers were able to get around. There were none of these crazy restrictions that the Democrats put on the ports and other things due to this, this pandemic that has long since waned. And so I know I'm not going to be very popular with the candidate down in the corner because he's more progressive and less conservative than I am. But those are just, and he's an economist, so he should know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But then, hey, I've been on the earth a lot longer than he has. So hey,
you got to bring a lot of humility to economics. That's one thing you learn over time.
Yeah, economics is a great field. I respect it, and all those. It's sort of like statistics, right? Okay, I'm done. You're
There you go.
Sorry, I was muted. I've been double booked this morning, but that's another story. I don't know if you ever get double booked, but it's a pain. Okay, so they're calling me in. Dr. Hamilton, what are your thoughts? What are the Biden administration doing on this taxes and inflation? How's it going?
Well, kind of what Dan said too. I think he inherited a lot of these problems. I mean, they're coming to roost. in his term, in his first year. But my go-to on this topic is I'm sure you all have heard Milton Friedman's quote: "Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon." So I think it has a lot more to do with what the Fed has done in terms of blowing up its balance sheet. Some of that was to support some of the stimulus problems, but so I don't know. I mean, I looked a little bit who Biden advisors are in that, but kind of to what Dan's point are, I don't think any of his ideas, President Biden's that is, and other people know this too, infrastructure projects, those are years in the making. Those aren't going to relieve inflationary pressures this year or next. He's done some, President Biden again, I think he's opened it up this summer to we can have higher ethanol in our cars, which I guess is a little bit worse for the environment. But I'd like to be in the room when the Democrats. I was Dan called me a progressive. I'll take that. I don't know what that means. I'm a moderate Republican, but I would love to have been in that room when Biden's advisors told him, we need to raise this ethanol limit on gas to help relieve gas prices, which I think it will. But I don't think. I think the bigger problem is some are again related to the stimulus money, but what the Fed has done. One number I was looking at yesterday was banks have about $4 trillion in excess reserves. So I teach. I'm an economics professor, and the textbook is always, we tell students, why would a bank hold extra cash, just like you or I, or in excess, when it's earning 0% interest? Actually, it earns about 0.5% interest now from the Fed. But I think that $4 trillion is going to start spilling out into the economy, which is going to cause, again, you didn't ask for this, but my prediction is, for what movie? Pain. I'm looking at 2 to 4 years of close to double-digit inflation, at least high single-digit inflation.
Wow, that's not very good. So we'll go to John Power. Maybe he can do better.
Yes, I hope. I've been wrong many times.
You're telling me double-digit inflation. Okay, John.
I agree with much of what both Dan and Paul said. This has been building for some time. Certainly, the massive stimulus payments that came out during COVID have been a factor in the short run, just as the supply and demand things have been factors in the short run. But we've had, I don't even remember how long now, we've had artificially low interest rates, that have kept the economy going. That has had to change at some point. Now we're seeing interest rates starting to rise. They've already gone up. What I think is it a half or a full point, or half, and another one scheduled in May. That's going to have a significant drag on the economy eventually. I've seen, just as a small example, one of my grain elevator clients is building a new agronomy center, and the price for just the building component of it from last summer, last fall, when they were first looking at it, to this spring when they signed the contract, went up $1 million.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's real money. I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal one day last week about the average, the cost of the mortgage rates have now gone to 5%, which increases the average monthly payment, based on an average price, 20% down payment, goes up 38%, goes from $1,200 some dollars to over $1,700. That's going to put a crimp on housing. There's just, $500 a month additional mortgage payment is more than many people can handle. So I think there's going to be some coming home to roost for a variety of the policies that we've had. Like Dan and maybe Nick, I don't think Paul's probably old enough, but I remember back, when the prime rate was over 18%, in the late 70s and early 80s, and I was just thinking about that this morning, and I just wondered how did the economy survive 18% prime rates? Hopefully we'll never see anything like that again. But I think I agree. There's going to be significant inflationary pressures that are going to continue for a while.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I do remember getting my first home. I actually I was very fortunate. My interest rate was only 10%. So
I was lucky.
felt,
I could assume a 13% for my first house,
I
and I
felt
was
really
lucky.
good. Okay. All right. So Paul, you're running for the Senate of the United States. What are the solutions that your opponent has come up with since he's a contributing factor to this? I think it's Rand Paul. Has
Yeah.
he come up with any solutions to taxes or inflation? What is his
Well, he's my
game plan?
opponent, so I don't. He has no good ideas. I'll just say that.
Okay.
Oh, come
I
on.
think
Oh, come on.
if
That's
he talks
unfair.
down, I don't know. He talks down Fauci enough. Somehow that will no.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
but he has nothing
Fauci
to
is a dirty dirt bag. We know that. So,
but he has nothing to do with taxes and inflation. What is the
Yeah.
economic plan?
I haven't read anything or heard anything that Rand Paul has said about inflation in terms of other than maybe just the standard Republican that this is Biden's noose that we need to hang him by or something.
well, energy independence, of course, right?
Yeah. Again, I don't know if Rand Paul's if that's his frontline message, but certainly that's the Republican idea, and I 100% agree. I mean, I think that was it was like we had this energy victory, finally energy independent 2 years ago, and it's like getting out of debt, and all of a sudden we're right back into it, heading the wrong direction.
So who did that? Who did that?
Not me. I wasn't in office.
No, Biden, right? Because Biden canceled the pipeline.
Yes. Well, certainly, like I said, I love to see the meeting when they talked about raising the ethanol gas standards.
Well, what's interesting about all this is the reason they're doing this, Nick, is to push the electric cars over the gas cars. They're trying to put enough economic pressure on people that they're going to go buy these electric vehicles, that they don't have the infrastructure, nor do they have the technology to support yet. It's a rich boy's toy. It's not for the middle class, and they know it. And yet they're trying to price people out of driving regular cars. When the truth is, we've got enough oil reserves to last us for several hundred years, and that'll give us plenty of time for the technology to develop. We're very close, maybe 10, 20 years out, right? But we're nowhere near there. And the electric technology is limiting the development of real energy solutions.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a field of dreams energy policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say it's a field of dreams, John, what are you talking about? What is, first of all, what
if we
is
build
the
it, they
energy
will come. And I think that's as Dan said, the infrastructure is not there. So the only other semi-rational thought is if we build enough cars, then there's an economic incentive to put the infrastructure in place. Mm-hmm. That seems backwards to me, because I'm certainly not going to buy one if I know I can't drive from here to Minneapolis without being assured of being able to have a rapid charge on the way if I need that. Right. There's no possible way I'm going to buy an electric vehicle. Right. It's fine if I'm commuting within town, but for much of the country outside of the coast, when we travel significant distances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. It's going to kill the people in the West, in the mid part of the country. Mm-hmm. There's a world supply of lithium shortages. Well, no, there's not. China controls most of the lithium. Duh, right? And so here we're setting ourselves up for this calamity, and it's really ridiculous and stupid. All the press this insane green agenda. Now, does the environment need some help? Well, yes. Is man causing most of the greenhouse problems and the cooling and the warming and all the other BS that's going on? No, it's cyclic. It's happening, sure, but it's cyclic. And so, we contribute to 4% of it. Hooray! What I mean is us. Are there things that we can do to help reverse what's happening? No, no.
Yeah, well, obviously that's just one part of the puzzle, but this inflation thing is going to hurt, and already has hurt more
Mhm.
lower income people, because it's really, if you look at it, it's just a tax on low
It
income
is.
people.
Look at food prices. Go to
Yeah,
the
more
store
than
and look
anything,
at food prices.
between food
ridiculous.
prices and also gasoline prices, et cetera. Paul, I don't know if you're in the debate mode here, but what are your
Sure.
what are your
Let's make it interesting.
solutions? What are your solutions to this inflation? Because when you're saying, well, double digit inflation, I don't think this generation and the generation before that has ever experienced double digit inflation. I got baptized into it, along with double digit unemployment, which we haven't seen yet. So
Yeah,
what are your
yeah.
thoughts?
Let the dogs out. Yeah. Um, well, it's kind of an academic joke, which usually aren't very funny. It's like, what's the solution to, as we were talking about, high gas prices? High gas prices. We need to experience the pain. So I have 4 kids, and I know they turned out to be much better than I deserve. I guess take credit to the Lord and my wife for that. But it's kind of the idea that Dan was illegal. People need to understand that. I don't drive a big SUV. I know a lot of people that do, and we got a lot of big trucks here in Kentucky with smokestacks on them for some reason. But if they want to drive them, I mean, I'm basically a free market guy. I mean, I'm taking some externalities with the smoke coming out of some of these guys. But yes, if you want to drive something that gets 10 or 12 miles per gallon and gas goes up, as I was telling my class, in America, again, we're sort of isolated. We look at $4 a gallon. You go, my parents are from Canada. We go up there every year, or except the last few years. They pay the equivalent of $6 a gallon. In Europe, they pay the equivalent of $6, $7, $8 a gallon. It's in liters and different, the euro and what have you.
Sure.
And so I think that we need to, I mean, in some ways it's nice to say, let's, like I mentioned, this ethanol increase and what have you. But to me, it's kind of old fashioned. I think it's something kind of David Watt. We need to experience the reality of this, not try to soften it, because the reality, and I think there's many analogies to the pandemic too, that we needed to, again, I don't want to go into another controversial topic, but with vaccinations, if in some ways we needed people to react in their own best interests, not necessarily by mandates. And there's some complexities to that. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off topic, but my solution would be more with the Fed trying to at least have a soft landing with some of this unraveling of the major Fed's balance sheet buildup. But that's really outside of Congress and the president. There's, they're trying to appoint some new Fed members, but I think they have 2 or 3 that are blocked or held up there. So I really don't see any like obvious things. Again, we talk again kind of early 70s price controls. I was born in '69, but I have no memories of traditional price controls. But
I remember they didn't work.
I remember
Yeah,
they didn't work either.
Yeah,
With
well,
inflation now.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, I mean, we're just going to be digging into our toolbox, and I don't think too many people are just saying, let's, I mean, some people are talking about, yes, that we're going to go back to the Volcker, double digit interest rates, the Fed driving that with their policy. As John said, and we're already up to 5% mortgage, which historically sounds pretty good, but they were half that, 6 months ago. So big changes in housing, and every loan lending market is going to be, I think, shaken dramatically over the next year.
Well, that'll drive
I
prices
think-
down, though. I mean, that'll have a tendency to drive prices down on homes because people won't be
Right.
moving.
Right.
But that will increase rents, which again hurts the lower class. This thing will tend to have an evening effect over time because everything does have equilibrium, as you know, Professor.
Mhm.
And but it's going to be. I think you're right. We're looking into a world of hurt. It sort of reminds me of the Jimmy Carter days, where we had yet another ineffectual milquetoast piece of crap Democratic president. Turns out to be a much better
Don't
former.
hold back, Dan.
Must have been. He's a much
And
better
Sean.
former president. And so glad he is a former president. But Biden has been a parasite in the lives of American people for his entire political career. He's been every word comes out of his mouth is a lie or a spin. His family's a crime family. It's proven. The evidence is there. He's been self-dealing against the American people for a number of years. Guy needs to go. The problem is that the vice president is ineffective and a total loser, and the Speaker of the House is a dinosaur who needs to retire and should have retired. And so there's no good backup plan for the Democrats. They have nobody who is effective. The Republicans are much in the same place, although they do have the candidate out of Florida, DeSantis, has been pretty effective, I think, and carries the same similar policies that effective policies that Trump proposed with respect to the economy. So we're in a world of hurt with respect to leadership, and leadership is a problem in our country today because of these people who are professional politicians and the intellectual elite, the world bankers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the media blockout of free speech. We're facing serious problems in this world because we are in the world of dystopia.
Mhm. That just doesn't sound very good. Paul, what are your solutions to this inflation? Because you said double-digit inflation for many years. What sort of solutions are out there?
Yeah, well, I don't think the government. The government created the problem, so we could go to the adage of, well, they need to fix it. But it was Ronald Reagan, I believe. The scariest words in the English language was for the U.S. government was here to help. So I think we need to.
Yeah.
I think we need to. There's things to look at, and it's hard to say, don't try to relieve some of the pain, but we really had 2 years of, and I think most people, whether it was my parents who are in Social Security, they're 80 years old, getting stimulus checks, and they're like, we didn't lose our jobs. We haven't been working for 15 years. I think many people just recognize the government is just trying to do way too much. And kind of Dan's point, I don't think, to put it a little bit, I don't think the people that we have, whether it's the politicians or the so-called experts behind them, have the chops to really address these issues in any way other than probably make it worse. So my thought would be, let interest rates rise. Don't try to do something crazy with, you mentioned taxes, which there are everything matters for everything, but I would be fearful of, again, let's do another Social Security tax holiday or something like that is basically just swapping more debt, making Social Security, another one of your topics, Nick, that much more quicker to insolvency and problems. So I think we do just need to experience higher interest rates. Yes, as Dan said, that's going to slow down some of the markets. But I think unemployment, again, we have this weird economy where we have one, inflation for the first time in basically my adult lifetime being a problem. But everything most everything else is not too bad. Stock market is still roaring. Unemployment's 3.6. I know not everyone's in that group, but yeah. Anyway, I'll let someone else
Yeah.
put their 2 cents in.
The problem that we always, I think we've had for many years and we continue to have, is we never want to have any pain. And, I think it was Dan said, everything is cyclical, and there's going to be ups and downs in all markets. That's the way markets are. And when that happens, there's going to, whether it's inflation or high unemployment, that causes pain for some people, and we aren't willing to accept that. Now, that doesn't mean we should just be cavalier about it and say, oh, too bad. But when we try to control things that we really can't control, whether it's price controls or things like that, the free market system, in my mind, is an amazing thing. It will always be right. The market. I had a gentleman that I knew, he was head of one of the grain commission companies. He said, "So you have to remember, the market is always right." Mm-hmm. And at that moment, and so what can we do as society, whether it's government, whether it's nonprofit organizations, to help mediate or mitigate that pain is a fair question. But don't try to eliminate it, because all we do is push it forward. And we've been doing that for God only knows how long.
Well, speaking about pushing it forward, this thing always bothers me. We try to bring it up on every show, Economics Monday. Medicare goes bust in 2026, okay? And 10,000 people per day turn age 65. So we're getting more and more people on the Medicare rolls, yet it's unsustainable. And when I looked at it, all the government said is, well, we're not really bust. We just can't pay our bills as they come in. We're not really broke. Now, why is it there's nothing out there? Why do politicians ignore this particular issue? And since, Paul, you're moving from the world of economics to being in politics, why is it that you don't tell your constituents that, well, guess what? Because, when you're older, you're more likely to vote. Okay, they've already run stats on that. And guess what? Your Medicare system goes broke in about 3 years. Why isn't that on the campaign trail, Paul?
Well, I think it is. And those dates, as you know, have been moving up. You see, every year they not just get a year closer, they get 2 years closer. And same with Social Security's insolvency. In some ways, it's, I have kind of this analogy. In some ways, America is kind of this Houdini economy that it always seems like the end is near, and insolvency, and we can remember, all of us can remember back in days when we hit whatever $100 billion of deficit, and now we hit almost 3,000 billion with the pandemic spending, but somehow the U.S. economy slips out of it. I say the same thing about Trump. So that's a little bit of my Republican story too. How does this guy keep on slipping out of news? I know probably Dan and others have much different opinions. But,
same way Biden does.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're politicians. They're connected. They're rich. But yeah, I think some of it is just we live for the next, I don't say day, but for the next year. And in the end, it's like, well, it's almost like it's not accounting, John's area or what have you. It's a theory. It's kind of like evolution's a theory, which is not really a theory, but that people just don't have a sense of, well, yeah, the government somehow will shift money around, or it's not like I'm going to go in and have 2 bad hips and they just fix one because there's a 50% shortage in Medicare funds. So anyway, I see the Honorable Dave Walker is joining us here.
Yeah, maybe you can help us out, David. Paul says we're looking, since he teaches economics, so his background's economics. He said we're looking at inflation being high single digits or double digits for the next 4 years. Dave, is there any solution to this, or are we going to have to start living with higher inflation? What are your thoughts?
Well, first, I think the first thing that we have to understand that high energy prices have multiple impacts on the economy and inflation. Um, because energy is so fundamental, not just with regard to transportation, but it's also fundamental with regard to fertilizers and plastics and many other types of things that are made out of petroleum products. So the first thing we need to do is we need to return to energy independence for the United States. We're producing 1.4 to 1.5 million fewer barrels of oil today than we were at the end of 2019. And there's a number of reasons for that, but that's a fact. We also need to recognize that, yes, we need to move towards more alternative energy sources, but we need to do that in a phased approach over time. Agricultural production has been adversely affected by the invasion of Ukraine. We can try to do what we can to increase production here and elsewhere. I mean, all this has to do with supply and demand. I mean, we've got supply chain challenges that obviously were exacerbated by COVID, or accentuated by COVID. We've got too much dependence on China and Taiwan, which we need to ultimately wean ourselves from over time. We've had way too much extra federal spending, $5 to $6 trillion of federal spending over the last several years with regard to COVID. And I would not be surprised if at least $1 trillion was wasted because there's been totally inadequate oversight, transparency, and accountability with regard to that. For example, the Congress never appointed a chairperson to oversee the Congressional Commission to oversee all this spending. The Fed needs to stop buying federal debt. It's artificially held down interest rates way too low, despite the fact that the economy was coming back. And so it's ultimately going to have to divest its federal debt purchases over time. And it's going to have measured interest rate increases. It's way late to the ball game on that. But all of these issues are going to happen. Now, Paul may have also talked about the money supply has increased dramatically over the last 2 to 3 years. And that would lead you to believe that absent some of these changes that I'm talking about here, that we're going to have an inflation problem for several years. On the other hand, if we can end up taking some of the steps that I'm talking about, we can moderate it and ultimately mitigate it quicker than otherwise would be the case under a status quo approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one thing that Biden has recommended, David, is increasing taxes, especially a billionaire's tax. Are increasing taxes, is that the solution for lower inflation, David?
Well, in theory, and Paul can talk about it. I mean, I taught the economics of national security at the Naval Academy, but I'm not a PhD economist. Okay, I mean, I probably know enough to be dangerous, Paul. Okay, I do homework though before I talk. I mean, obviously, to the extent that if you increase taxes, you in theory may reduce demand. Okay, and with regard to the supply and demand imbalance, there's no question, in my opinion, that the tax rates that we have right now are the lowest we're ever going to have. They're only going one way, and that's up. And while our structural imbalance is primarily a spending problem, mandatory spending being number one, discretionary spending being number two, income security is the highest category of spending in the last year. Income security, all right, and that's excluding Social Security. While we are going to have additional revenues, and we're not going to get additional revenues just through pro-growth tax reform. We can get some that way, but we're not going to get it just through pro-growth tax reform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
it could have the opposite effect because if in some instances adjusting the tax system to increase productivity drives more tax revenues. The problem is it's a careful balance. You can actually destroy the economy or make it worse by raising taxes, by putting more pressure, puts people out of jobs, creates more pressure on the economy. I mean, so it's a push me, pull me kind of proposition, is it not?
Look, all tax reforms aren't equal. Let me just get something off the table here. All tax cuts not only are not equal, all tax cuts do not stimulate the economy, and very, very few tax cuts pay for themselves. And so, we can go into specific proposed reforms if we want to. I mean, I think from a political standpoint, there's a lot more political support for a quote unquote wealth type tax. There are practical problems as to how do you implement such a thing. And there are also questions with regard to the constitutionality of it, right? My only point is I come back to what I've said before. When I did the 10,000 mile, 27 state national fiscal responsibility bus tour in 2012, we came up with a range of solutions that got 77 to 97% support based on 6 principles for reform. Pro-growth, because again, the metric was we want to get debt to GDP down to a reasonable and sustainable level over time. So you want to grow the denominator faster than the numerator. So pro-growth, culturally acceptable, socially equitable, mathematical integrity, politically feasible, and meaningful bipartisan support. If you don't meet all 6 of those criteria, you will not achieve sustainable success. The problem is the Democrats in general want to grow government, increase dependency on government, which results in significant increases in spending. And we already have a structural imbalance because of known demographic trends and rising healthcare costs in connection with mandatory spending. The Republicans want to cut taxes, saying they'll pay for themselves, but they don't normally pay for themselves. And the combination of those two things is we hemorrhage on the bottom line and we compound our debt to GDP problem.
Yeah. David, is there any way to solve this debt to GDP problem? I remember reading quite some time ago, they said if you're over, 100% debt to GDP, that's bad, like Italy and Spain. And we just went over that.
Well, Rogoff and Reinhardt did a study that's been somewhat controversial that said once you hit 90% of public debt to GDP, you have a negative effect on economic growth. All right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it depends upon how do you measure. Are you measuring debt held by the public, or are you measuring gross debt? All right. Debt held by the public right now is about 100% of GDP because we've had some GDP growth. All right. So it's about 100%. If you want to measure debt subject to the debt ceiling limit as compared to GDP, it's about 125. My view is that we can handle 90% of debt to GDP, debt held by the public to GDP. We can handle that given the nature of our economy. The problem is that where we're headed. CBO estimated last year that we're headed to over 200% of debt held by the public to GDP by 2051 if we don't change course. 200%. Okay. Reasonable people can differ at what point you have a significant adverse economic drag, but it's way below that. And there's no question we're heading there.
Right. Paul, what are your solutions as an economist to this rising problems of inflation and debt to GDP, which seems to be something, I guess, if you try to win an election based on debt to GDP, everybody's going to go, I don't know what you're even talking about.
We'll put more people to sleep. I actually read since I was on your show a couple of weeks ago, and I was already a fan of David Walker from many years ago. But I read his new book, pay for it on Amazon. So
thank you very much. I hope you got the new one. I hope you got the new one that had the 2021 update.
I did, yeah. In the appendix, yeah. So you updated and you talked some about even inflation. So it was, and I was going to mention actually, David, I was in grad school at IU with Curtis Swoop, who and Pam Schmidt was in my year, and so I was good friends with them. I haven't been in touch with them for many years, but say hi to him for me. So
he's now associate dean. He got
promoted. All these guys have taken off. They're all big shots. I've got to win Senate just to keep up with my my former grad school friends. So, but yeah, I think a lot of it. I mean, economics can get very technical and mathematical, and so the MIT and Harvard and Chicago, Stanford guys and gals, and Naval Academy. But a lot of it, I think, comes back to kind of Dave Walker's. I mean, it's common sense that debt matters. And again, we can have intellectual or common sense debates about, when does it really become a problem? But it's always a problem. I guess other than cyclical kind of things. A little bit back to Biden. I don't think Biden's tax, the billionaire or wealth tax, are really anything to do with inflation. I think they're much more about how we're going to pay for more free stuff for the rest of society. So I don't think Biden has any kind of good inflation plan, and he's going to as long as he's president, the next 3 years, he's going to have to experience a lot of this inflationary pain, starting with the midterms here in 6 months. So one thing I mentioned that kind of one of my ideas, and it's not entirely unique, but I do have, and I think Dave Walker mentioned this in his book and others too. Actually, it's not DeSantis, it's the other guy from Florida. This idea that everyone should have kind of skin in the game. It comes back to yes, exactly. And I know it's a tough sell to say, poor people. The analogy I use in my class, and I'm currently not at a Christian school, but when I was, and even now, I still say, in God's wisdom, a tithe is 10%. It's not, only for the millionaires or billionaires. So if God is a flat tax guy, maybe it tells something for modern economics as well. But kind of my spin on that is, and you probably all know, the value-added tax. Any tax has a negative connotation, but most other countries have some form of value-added tax, essentially a sales tax that's charged at each stage. And kind of I'm a former engineer and numbers guy and kind of quant guy, so I think we could do some stuff with a blockchain, which is usually associated with Bitcoin and kind of some more. It's kind of fringy, though. Now I hear like 15% of adults have Bitcoin. I'm like, I wouldn't touch this stuff. But I think there's something there. And one thing that would do, it would give us a mechanism to say, when we are short, the value-added tax goes from whatever, 4 to 6%. So everyone needs to experience. When Congress, if I'm not there, or even if I am part of the problem, when we overspend or when we hit a certain debt limit, we basically have this auto mechanism, this value-added tax that can rise, and everyone needs to feel like some experience of this pain, not just, as again, I'm very middle class. I would say I've made 6 figures maybe twice in my whole lifetime, and they're only by a few thousand. But this idea, I think it was Clinton, Hillary, middle class was defined up to $250,000. And now we're not even talking that. Now even millionaires are, not that they're middle class, but they don't need to be paying. Well, let's just go after the elite, the billionaires that maybe there's just some sense that most of them got their money through not hard work or ingenuity, but some whatever underhanded way. So,
Paul, let me jump in for a second if I can.
Sure.
Well, first, as you know from the book, depending on the year, over 40% of individuals who file tax returns do not pay federal income taxes.
Yeah.
And about 20% get a rebate through the earned income tax credit primarily. So part of the concept is, now, in fairness, they do pay payroll taxes. In fact, most people pay more in payroll taxes than they do in income taxes, right? And the payroll tax is very regressive. But the difference is they get something for the payroll tax. They get Social Security and Medicare. So what that means is that over 40% of tax filers, individual tax filers, are not paying anything for the basic role of government, whether it's national security, homeland security, transport, whatever, you name it, although you have gas taxes for transportation, okay? So the income tax, all right, for whatever the income tax. So part of the concept is, look, everybody at least above the poverty level, and I'm talking about the real poverty level, not the ones where they want to end up having 2 to 3 times the poverty rate for federal subsidies. That's part of the problem. Should pay something. we should have a progressive tax. There's no question. So everybody who's above the poverty level should pay something. People that earn more and have more should pay more on a relative basis. Okay. And that's a fundamental concept. That's a fairness concept that I think we have to keep in mind that we haven't kept in mind in the past. The other thing you got to keep in mind is wealthy people don't make their money through wages. They make their money through investments. And investments end up having a lower income tax rate, and you don't pay Social Security or Medicare taxes on investment income. And depending upon what kind of investment income you have, you may not pay federal income taxes at all. For example, if you're investing in state and local bonds, all right? And so, I think that, we need to be, frankly, a lot smarter with regard to how we're designing our tax system so that it's pro-growth, so it's more equitable, all right? And equitable means everybody above the poverty level ought to pay something, but people who make a lot more ought to bear a greater relative burden. And we've got $1.6 trillion a year in deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, lost revenue. And guess what the largest one is when you count both income and payroll taxes? People don't pay income or payroll taxes on employer provided and paid health care. It's several $100 billion a year. So what does that do? That disconnects people from the true cost of health care. It fuels health care costs. And I thought we got a health care cost problem. I mean, it makes no sense.
Yep. Actually, the way I understand it, David, is that 20% of our GDP is spent on healthcare right now.
It's about 20%. That's correct.
Yeah. So we have a real big problem with a lot of our money just going to pay healthcare, and that's one reason I'm not sure if our economic plan, if we even have any, is sustainable as is. In other words, are we moving
and we don't have one. So
yeah, well, that's what I was afraid you're going to say. I mean, the thing is,
we need a new U.S. senator from Kentucky. I think that's probably what we're all saying here.
Yeah, well, the thing is, see, the pro-growth to me makes sense, David. In other words, we have to have a pro-growth plan. As I converse with the Chinese almost every day, their goal is they're very driven to push their economy forward. It's almost like this huge army moving forward to do one thing: overtake the United States of America. I mean, if you don't think that that's a problem, I mean, it is a real problem. Their goal is to become the #1 economy in the world, overtake the United States of America, and defeat the USA. I mean, that's it. And we don't have any goals like that. In other words, to keep ourselves in terms of being the #1 economy in the world. We don't have a pro-growth plan. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure if we have any plan at all. At least coming from Washington, D.C. And I know you live near the Beltway, David. Have you heard any plan that makes any sense at all coming out of the Beltway?
The U.S. consolidated federal government does not have a strategic plan, a future-focused, results-based, integrated, and resource-constrained plan. None. There is none. The closest thing that there is to one that deals with consolidated U.S. government is the plan that we put together a little over 20 years ago at the GAO, and we update it every 2 to 3 years. That's the only thing that exists that is government-wide, future-focused, results-oriented. And that's part of the problem. The Chinese think long-term.
They do.
They have goals. They have objectives, they have plans, and they execute on those plans.
They execute on
them. You can hold people accountable.
Correct. Right.
As I said, one last thing, and I'll let go because Dan wants to talk. You need a plan, but in addition to that, to have successful and sustainable policies, you need 3 things: properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing; adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance they will do the right thing; and appropriate accountability if they don't. We're 0 for 3 in healthcare, K through 12 education, executive compensation, our political system. I could go on, but you got the message.
Right. Yeah, Dan.
Add on top of that, the level of political and private corruption that goes on among the elite. That the pay to play, the Chinese have this down. They have managed to bribe, cajole, create through contracts, relationships with some of the leading top tech executives and others in the banking elite in the world. And this is one of the problems, both in the United States and around the world. They know how the game is played, that people are motivated by this, and they're spending plenty of that to influence peddle people. In the United States, anyone associated with government and in private business should be prohibited from doing that, because that creates corruption, that creates incentives for the kinds of things that are going on around the world. Face it, we're at war with China. We need to recognize that. Everyone who's aiding and abetting the enemy at this point is doing something to undermine the United States and their best interest. Congress also should be accountable, just like anyone else, for inside dealing and any business relationships for which they have inside information, them, their spouses, their families, or anyone. The Biden family should not be doing self-dealing on business deals with Russia and China and our enemies. They shouldn't be taking money from them. They should be prohibited from taking money from them. It's one of the big problems with the corruption. It's the money under the table stuff. It's the bank deals by the big bankers and the insider trading, the dark money that goes around the world, and the shadow money market, which represents about 70% of the creation of money in the world. You know all about that, I imagine. And it's all corruption. It's all because people are trying to get rich and create money from nothing. And that drives problems around the world, creates poverty, creates inequality, makes the rich richer, makes the poor poorer, and really creates a problem. So globalism, although it was supposed to create it to help solve a lot of problems and create and expand markets, it's also created a lot of corruption and a lot of money deals that have created political problems and social problems.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, I would say we're in a global economic Olympics with China. I wouldn't say that we're at war with China. I do, however, believe that there is an alliance of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and several other countries against the economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural influence of the United States. I think that's real. I don't think we ever want to go to kinetic war with China. And I think one of the things we have to keep our eye on, and one of the things we have to learn from as a result of Ukraine, is Taiwan. Because one of our supply chain challenges and one of our inflationary driver challenges is semiconductors. Okay, and 50% of the world's semiconductors come out of Taiwan.
Yep.
And that's just another example of how the United States has allowed itself to become way too dependent on China, Taiwan, and other countries for some critical materials.
Right.
It's all because of greed.
Yeah, and also the lack of planning. I mean, if you were investing and your stock was the United States of America, and you're telling me all these facts that two of our systems are going to be broken 2026, 2034, that our debt is equal to our income. No, it exceeds our income. And then our plan is we don't have a plan. Would anyone invest in the United States of America? Paul, you're running for U.S. Senate, but as an investment, to me, would be a horrible investment. I'm taking my money and going elsewhere. It looks like
they might short
you're
it.
an economic. What?
They might short it.
Yeah, you might short the stock, but the minute you tell me, wait, I have no business plan. Okay, I don't have any plan. I'm just kind of out there. Most investors would drop. They wouldn't even invest in the USA. So what are your thoughts about running around with a multi-trillion-dollar business with no plan? Paul.
Well, I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think the U.S. economy is kind of this Houdini economy. Somehow we get out of a jam. And, my other analogy is the guy that drives home, drunk every night from the bar. Sooner or later, he's going to, have that accident and maybe, end it all. So I do think, and part of my campaign is there is this day of reckoning, and it has many dimensions to it. And Dave Walker's in his book and today's mentioned some of these that, as you have, that, you know, this isn't like normal economic problems. These are historic problems. And I think I said on the earlier show, it's striking to me the United States as the wealthiest country, but we're a net debtor. That doesn't make sense. I mean, maybe it speaks to our materialism or the what our politicians have been up to, probably more so. But yeah, I try to remain optimistic, and you know, I do. We are in such a big hole. It's not just a matter of whoever becomes president in 24 grabbing the reins, and Congress reading Dave Walker's book and coming around to some you know, real things that we can do. I think it was mentioned in one of the earlier shows. I think we're going to have a crisis of the sort. You know, if 10% inflation isn't enough, then we need something else. When the stock market maybe falls off the rails here, then that gets more people's notice. So I like to say there's hope, but at the same time, I think that there needs to be a lot more thought put into this, and action.
Well, there are solutions, and a lot of them are noted in the book. But the biggest deficit this country has is a leadership deficit.
Right. Yeah.
And until we get, until we get a president, I don't care what political party and what their name is, until we get a president that will use the bully pulpit to lead on this, and until we get some constitutional constraints on debt to GDP with automatic targets, triggers, and enforcement mechanisms on both the spending side and the revenue side, then I'm concerned that we're not going to do what we have to do. Now, in the end, when the trust funds go to zero, they'll do something. But
Right.
That's downright stupidity to have to
Right.
wait that long before you do something.
Yep. And next week, we're going to finish for this week, but next week we have another Senate candidate, Morgan Harper, who's next door to Paul. She's running for U.S. Senate in the state of Ohio. So next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. And Paul, you can join us if you want to, because economics is a big subject of what we're doing here.
She's a Democrat, right?
She's a Democrat. She's running for Senate in
That'll
state
be
of Ohio.
fun.
And she's going to be on next
We're
week.
nonpartisan, Paul.
We're nonpartisan
Yeah.
here, so we bring
Oh.
anybody on. So we
I
don't really
will.
care.
I live in Ohio, so I'd be glad to. Yeah, I'll chime in
Okay,
next
maybe
week.
we'll
to
join
give her a
us,
whole
but
time.
yeah, she'll be on next week, and we do want to thank our panelists and the Honorable David M. Walker and Paul Hamilton
Thank you.
for being on our show, and we'll see you all next week on Economics with the Honorable David Walker. Till then, have a good week. Take care. Bye.